This is the FA2 Sea Harrier, and I want to talk about this, but first I've got to talk about the Kestrel, which is its ancestor. Now, the Kestrel was a test bed that was used to develop the Sea Harrier. The family tree of the Sea Harrier is quite complex, but the Kestrel was one of the test platforms that came after the flying bedstead and various other things that they did as they were working towards VTOL aircraft. Now, before I could talk about the Kestrel, I want to tell a little side story about how the Kestrel contributed to one of the second most prolific pilot's scores. You see, for now, I want to tell you the story of a guy called Gerhard Backhorn, and he was known as Gerd to his friends, so that's what I'm going to be calling him from now on. And he was a German pilot in the Second World War, and he was a fairly successful guy because by the end of the war, he had a score of 301. You see, Gerd didn't get off to a particularly auspicious start. When he was in flight school, his commander considered even flunking him out because he just thought he wasn't getting this whole flying thing. But then Gerd was posted and he managed to pass through flying school, and he ended up serving during the Battle of Britain. Now, he didn't particularly have a lot of success, but he did actually serve with distinction, and he was awarded several medals for some of his actions. But he was still on a 0 score, so that had to wait until the next thing that happened to Gerd. You see, Gerd's experience of the Battle of Britain ended when he was shot down over the Channel, and he was rescued and he recovered. But after that, he was posted to the Eastern Front, and on the Eastern Front is where things started to slowly change for Gerd. Now, it's worth mentioning that Gerd was flying a Messerschmitt 109, and this was significantly more advanced than anything the Russians had at the time. So there is an element of that involved in why his score ended up being so high. But that said, he had huge respect for the Russian pilots and said himself that on several occasions he would sweat like he was in a shower trying to maneuver his aircraft and trying to stay on the tack and trying to take down these guys. So they weren't an easy target, but it is fair to say that he was in a much superior piece of machinery. It was on one of his early missions in Russia that he happened across a Polikarpov that was on the ground still, taxied to takeoff, and he strafed it and destroyed it. And that became his first kill. And it was only about a week later that he happened across an Ilyushin, and he took that out in an airborne kill, and that became his first airborne kill. On several occasions, he achieved what was known as being an ace in a day. And to be a fighter ace, it was considered that you had to have shot down 5 enemy aircraft. And to be an ace in a day, you had to do 5 enemy shoot downs in one day. And he achieved that on at least 4 occasions, possibly more. On the 5th of January 1945, he made his last air-to-air shoot down. And that brought pretty much his career to an end. He did spend a few more months doing some defense of the Rhine stuff. He was briefly kind of involved in the jet program, but he never really saw any success in that period. And then in May 1945, he surrendered with the rest of his squadron to the Allies. Post-war, after a stint in civilian life, Gerd found himself back in the Air Force when West Germany formed the Bundesluftwaffe, and he was asked to rejoin at the same rank as he left back in the 1945 war. He ended up stationed and flying starfighters. So fortunately for him, fairly soon after that, he was transferred to a test pilot squadron, so he wasn't flying starfighters for too long. And this is where his connection to the Harrier comes in. In 1963, he was test flying a Kestrel, the predecessor to this, and as he was coming into land, the engines cut out when the aircraft was still a metre or so above the ground, and the aircraft just dumped itself and crushed all the landing gear. So it wasn't the worst crash ever, but he wrote the aircraft off. And as the ground crews were helping him out of the aircraft, he was heard to mutter 203, which means 302. I mean, it was an Allied aircraft, and he did wreck it, so I guess it counts.